Om Agana Timranda Syagana Gana Salakya Chaksur Unmilitam Yena Tajmai Sri Gurve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutare Swayam Rupakaramayam Darati Swaparantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Siyatar Karakamaram Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sha Sri Rupam Sagaratam Sahagana Raganatam Bitam Stam Sajevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parejana Sayitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakhan Bitam Sja Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Saraswati Deva Guruvani Pacharine Nirvishesa Sunyabadi Praskata De Sadhari Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hari 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 Ram 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 Hari Hari Narayanam Namaskritam Naram Cheva Narottamam Devam Saraswatim Vyasam Tito Jayodhirayat Nashta Priyasho Bhadresu Nitya Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shaki Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki Nigamaka Paruragaritam Palam Shukamakaramrita Dravi Samitam Pibata Bhagavatam Rashamalayam Mohora Hora Sikabhabi Bhabka Kaham Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare. Welcome to Motivational Monday. A new week begins, hopefully of inspirational talks based on the Srimad Bhagavatam, the beautiful story of the Absolute Truth. Thanks for joining us this morning. Bill from Cathedral City, Paki from South Jordan, and about 6 other people according to the little icon there. We appreciate your partnering with us on these early morning talks, and interact as much as you can with little emojis and share and join so we can expand our listenership or watchership as the case may be. We didn't finish our discussion of the 3rd verse, 3rd chapter, 1st canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. Daniel, nice to see you joining us. Hope that you're coping with all this lockdown. Katyani, Hare Krishna from San Diego. So honored that you're appearing on the bottom of our screen there. Greg Headley. All righty. We've already got our verse selected today, Greg, so we take questions at the end and we try to ask questions that pertain to the subject matter. So listen very carefully and then bring up your questions in the comment section later. Good morning, Jimmy. Good morning, Manasaganga. The gang's all here, so we might as well get started then. Yashavaya Shamshtanai Kaupito Lakavishtara Tavai Bhagavato Rupam Vishuddham Shatpam Urditam. Again, this is our 2nd day on this verse, carrying over from last Wednesday. It is believed that all the universal planetary systems are situated on the extensive body of the Purusha, but he has nothing to do with the created material ingredients. His body is eternally in spiritual existence par excellence. Good morning, Yuda Pratima. Now, there's a verse which is considered one of the 4 major verses, and these 4 verses capsulize the entire 20,000 verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which were spoken over 7 days and nights continuously by Sukadeva Goswami de Maharaj Parikshit. So if you want to find out, like people said, well, can you summarize it in 25 words or less? Or in a nutshell? Yes, this verse represents 25% of the meaning of the Bhagavatam. And it is as follows, and called the Chatur Shlokas, the key, the essence, the pith of the entire Srimad Bhagavatam. And it goes as follows in the Sanskrit. Aham evasham evagre nanyad sada sat param pascharaham yad etachcha yo vishisheda shosmiyaham. Now listen very carefully. Krishna is speaking. I believe this is to Lord Brahma. Prior to the creation, only I exist. That's before the sun, the moon, the stars, before even Shiva, before Brahma, before Lord Vishnu, in Karunadakshay, Chiradakshay Vishnu, Garbhadakshay Vishnu. And no phenomenon exists. In other words, there was only the spiritual world. It was only the world of light and bliss. Natad bhasyate surya nashishankanama. The original world, of which this temporary coming and going material world is only a shadow reflection. The original world is described by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita as not requiring sunlight or moonlight or electricity, because its nature is that it's self-effulgent. Also, another characteristic of the spiritual world is that anybody who gets out of the material world and returns back to home, back to the spiritual world, never a second time returns to the material world. You can touch fire once just to assure yourself that it does indeed burn, just like your dad told you all along. But having touched fire once and gotten burned, you're highly unlikely to touch fire a second time. So having come to this world of birth, death, disease, and old age, this vastly inferior material world where everything's in flux and change, and learns one's lesson that one's home, one's position is in the spiritual world, and goes back, then Krishna says one never returns to this material world, which is coming and going. This material world is like a cloud in the eternal, effulgent spiritual sky. A cloud appears sometimes and disappears, and the reality, the substance of a cloud is less. It's something wispy, misty, hanging there. Its existence is precarious, shifting of a few winds, and the cloud breaks up and dissipates. So compared to the substance, the ultimate reality of the spiritual world, which has no changes, it has no time, where there's no birth, death, disease, and old age, this whole material creation is just no more substantial or no more real than a cloud in the sky. That's the real world. We say the difference between the material world and the spiritual world is that in the spiritual world, matter is conspicuous by its absence. And when you think about it, all the problems that we have in this material world arise from the fact that it's composed of matter. Now, if you were to imagine yourself in a world which had all the variety, in fact, which was the origin of all the variety that we see in this material world, where there was no matter present, then there would be no birth, no disease, no old age, no past, no present, no future. There would not be the action of cause and effect. This material world is caused by our desires to separate from God. That is the cause of this material world. God accommodates us by creating this world of matter, allows us to depart from Him and enter into this world of matter, and after which we suffer the results of our own deeds because we wanted to come into this material world. Therefore, consequently, we've created karmic reactions in this world. For every action is an opposite reaction, but the original action was a function of the false ego, wherein we began to perceive our interests and ourselves as separate from God. That was the beginning of causality. It is said, Mama Peti Pranarjanma Dukalayam Ashashvatam. Prabhupada describes that Sat and Asat mean cause and effect in this material world. Good morning, Prashant. Sat and Asat. Mama Peti Pranarjanma Dukalayam Ashashvatam. So we came to this world of cause and effect, and because the cause of this world was our own independent desire to live separate from the God, we accept all the results of all of our actions. It's not the case in the spiritual world, because whatever one does in the pure kingdom of God is God-centered, is for the satisfaction of the senses of the Lord. And because our senses come from His senses, when we serve the senses of the Lord, our senses are automatically satisfied. But in the material world, we come here to satisfy our senses, and we're not concerned about satisfying the senses of the Lord. So we then become the doers, Krakriti Kriyamanini Gune Karvasha Sharvisha, and we assume the results of both of our good and bad actions. It's therefore true to say that outside of the creation of this material world, there's no causality, because everything is driven by love. And there's no time as we know it in terms of past, present, and future. Time is eternal. There's only the ongoing rasa. There's only the ongoing reciprocal, intimate, relishable, delicious, you might say, exchange of love between the Lord and his forever liberated devotees. So that's the eternal spiritual world. That's reality. That's substance. Then shadow is this material world. So prior to this shadow world, there was the self-effulgent, eternal, spiritual world, not driven by causality, but driven by pure, unalloyed love of God going back and forth between the Lord and his devotees. Now, at some point, this material world is created, just like in the prison, just like in the government. Whenever a government is established, there's the town hall, there's the civic center, there's the court system, and ultimately there's the prison house. Although most of the citizens live happily and peacefully as law-abiding citizens, free to do whatever they want, to go wherever they were, to work and recreate however they choose, it's always recognized that a certain percentage of the citizens will be outlaws, will not respect the laws of citizenry, and therefore it's inevitable that every state, every municipality, every government will construct a prison house to take those disruptive elements, those culprits, you might say, out of the mainstream of society and put them incarcerated somewhere else so they won't bother others. So similarly, this material world is created as a sort of a prison house where all those disruptive souls in the spiritual world, or potentially disruptive souls in the material world. Good morning, Koki. Haribo, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Haribo. I hope Kishore is there somewhere as well. So the prison house is not representative of the mainstream population. These are aberrant citizens who have lost their rights to the same freedoms that law-abiding citizens create. Now, it's important to note that even though the prison house is kind of a separate entity from the overall government, it has its own rules, it has its own mood, it has its own particular population. Nevertheless, even though it's not in concert, though the prison house is not in harmony with the overall state, its priorities, its laws, nevertheless, it is part of the government, part of the state, part of the municipality. It's not the best part. The people who populate the prison are not acting according to either their best interests or the interests of the whole, but nevertheless, they are a part of the state. So in the same way, the inhabitants of this material world, you and I, came here because we were a potentially disruptive element in the spiritual world, which is not governed by selfishness or self-centeredness, which is governed by love of God and service to him. Recognizing that there was a need for a place for the deviant souls, Krishna then, out of his inferior, and remember the spiritual world is his internal potency, but to accommodate the living beings who are more or less divergent from him, he creates the material world out of inferior energy. Just like when you create the prison house. You don't have swimming pools, you don't have tennis courts, you don't have luxury gleaming gyms with mirrors, you don't have gourmet restaurants, you don't create the prison buildings, the prison complex as if it were Club Med or Sandal. Basically, because these people are not contributing to society, they're not taxpayers, they're not honest, wholesome members of society. You don't want to waste the best sorts of materials on building the prison house. You're going to build a prison house of basic materials, basic plumbing, basic electricity, basic concrete blocks, and basic mortar. Nothing elaborate, nothing fancy. So similarly, this material world, and it's even so, this material world has a lot to recommend it. There are all kinds of vacation resorts in Puerto Vallarta, in Cancun, in Dominican Republic, and St. Thomas, alluring places with white sandy beaches and kayaking and water skiing and restaurants, and pools and spas and all that kind of stuff. And remember that in spite of all of that, this is the prison house. So imagine the glories of the spiritual world. But our theme today is that whatever there may be and whatever phase this material world may be in, whether it be unmanifest or manifest, really it's nothing but Krishna. The materials, the walls, the amenities, the utilities in the prison house are all supplied by and paid for by the government. Again, they're not the best that's available, but everything in the prison house is resting on the foundation of the government support. And similarly, in the same way that before any of this material world was created, before the sun and the moon and the stars were hung, before the upper planetary systems were established and ruled over by the demigods, there was the spiritual world, and even this material world itself is nothing more than Krishna. In the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Aham sarvasya prabhavo. In other words, both matter and spirit are emanating from him. And this, unlike the spiritual world, which is all spirit, it's all internal potency, this material world is a combination of material inferior energy and the superior energy. There is matter, which is bhumir apo narovarir kama narubarivacha, earth, air, fire, water, mind, intelligence, and false ego. These are the 5 gross energies of matter, and mind, intelligence, and false ego are the 3 subtle energies of matter. And then impregnated into those 8 material elements is Jiva Bhuta Mahabaho Yeyam Darichejagat. We infinitesimal, aberrant, deviant living entities come into the material world with our desires to live independently of God, to lord it over the area in which we've been assigned. And so we spring up in 8,400,000 species of life. But we are emanations from the Lord. The material energy are emanations from the Lord. So even this material world is nothing more than the extension of the energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then in due course, Sahasra Yuga Parayantama Hariya Brahmadobharu, in due course, the material world, just as it has come into being, after its period, after its term of manifestation, there will be an annihilation. That cloud of Mahatattva in the spiritual world will break up and disappear, and all the living beings, as they're interrupted in the midst of their sense gratificatory, self-promoting activities, are interrupted. They're retracted back into the body of the Lord, and they remain in a sleep for a long, long extended period of time. And then when it's again time for manifestation, the Lord, as Mahavishnu, exhales, and from his skins and the pores of his body, the universes come. And in each universe, there's a Brahma. Brahma is an engineer. He constructs the stuff of this material world. He forms the 8,400,000 species of life which inhabit each and every universe. And then the Lord glances, without directly taking part, the Lord glances over these material universes, and through his glances, all those living beings who had been interrupted at the time of the previous annihilation are then impregnated into the newly created, newly manifested material world, and according to their mood and their flavors of desire for sensuality and sense gratification, they spring up in 8,400,000 species of life. But our thesis is that there is only God. Prior to creation, there's only Krishna, full with his 6 opulences. During creation, there is only Krishna in the terms of his material and spiritual entities, matter and the living beings combine to create this material world. And then after the material world is wound up, then guess what? There is only Krishna again. Now Krishna's energy on which this material world rests is called the Brahmajyoti, the effulgence which emanates from the transcendental form of the Lord. And last Wednesday we gave the example that the sunshine is the basis of vegetation, fruits and vegetables. It provides the sustenance by which we're able to maintain our lives. And the way that happens sequentially is that the sunshine, first you start with the sun god, and he lives in the sun globe, and from the sun globe comes sunshine. So first you start with Krishna, the original personality of Godhead, whom you can see face to face by serving him with love and devotion under the auspices of a bona fide spiritual master. First you start with the highest thing, which is always a person. Then you go to the abode, the residence of that person. So the sun god lives on the sun planet. And then finally, the third and the lowest stage is the sunshine. Sun god, sun globe, and sunshine. Now the sunshine is the basis of all the varieties and fruits and vegetables that we use to maintain us. But wherever there is impersonal energy, such as the sunshine, you'll always be able to trace it back to a personal source. Just like in our government, there are various laws, and those laws are in themselves impersonal, but the lawgivers are personal. Or electricity. Electricity powers our whole civilization. Electricity itself is impersonal, but if you trace the electricity back to its source, you come to a powerhouse, which was engineered and designed, and in fact is run at this very moment, overseen and managed by people. So everything is ultimately personal, but the basis, the secondary or tertiary, you might say, basis for this material world is the effulgence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just like the sun god, he doesn't have anything personally to do with nourishing fruits and vegetables on this planet. He doesn't have to come down and shed his rays on every tomato and every pepper and every watermelon. In fact, sun god has really nothing to do with this earth planet. He's got his own civilization, his own cities, his own residence. He's got his own business, and he's fully absorbed there. But because he's so powerful, independent and separate from him, his energies in the form of sunshine beat down on our oceans. Most of the surface of the earth is covered by water, and that water is salty, and therefore it is unsuitable for watering and nourishing our crops. And the arrangement of the Lord through the sun god is that the sunshine beats down on the ocean, it heats the ocean, and as a result of that heating, the water of the ocean is evaporated, condensed, and as such it rises, forms clouds. The clouds waft over the cooler air of the mountains on Earth, and the atmospheric conditions then cause those clouds to release their moisture on the mountaintops. When the rainwater falls on the mountaintops, it's dispersed into various rivers and rivulets, which flow down into the valleys where there's fertile soil, and the soil is nourished, and then whatever seeds humankind has planted sprout out in fruits and vegetables. So the impersonal sunshine is the cause of is the cause of the cloud, is the cause of the rain, and consequently is the cause of all the fruits and vegetables and grains which we take in order to nourish ourselves. So it is in the same way the Brahman effulgence, the energy rolling off the body of the Lord, is the cause of all the varieties in this material world. So even though this material world is a divergent world, just like the prison house is divergent from the main interests of the government, still it is not separate from the government it rests and it depends upon the government. The government is the foundation. So similarly, even this material world, which is for all intents and purposes godless, which unlike the spiritual world is not God-centered. This material world is not self-effulgent. It requires artificial illumination in the form of the sun, the moon, the electricity. The inhabitants are not pious. They're not God-centered. The activities which drive the business of this material world are entirely selfish. They're competitive. They're polluted and tinged with envy of one living being by another. And in spite of the fact that in almost every way, this material world is totally at odds with and different from the spiritual world, still it's absolutely astounding that God, through his energies, continues to maintain and support us as a loving Father. Though we don't care a fig for him, he still extends himself to us and gives us everything that we need in order for our maintenance. Eko Bahonam Yodadati Kaman. Nitya Nityanam. Nityanam, we're all the plural eternals, and at least those of us, the 25% who are in this material world, we are totally indifferent to God, God consciousness, devotional service, learning about God, glorifying. We're totally indifferent, uninterested in that. We'll turn and walk in the other direction. In spite of that, God is so kind, so humble, that he continues to support us, patiently awaiting for us to give up our errant ways and come back and re-engage in him with loving devotional service. There is no comparison for the mercy of God. In this material world, the people that are for you, that love you, and that will go out of their way, even give up their lives for you, are your parents. And yet we find many instances where the children do something so egregious, so criminal, so appalling, so abominable that the parents no longer want to be associated with them. They disown the children. They cut them off. They cast them out and cease all communications with them. Even loving parents who normally would go much further along to support their children than people in general have their limits. But Krishna has no limits. Not only does he patiently put up with your offenses to him, not only does he provide for us an entire world where we can play out our illicit fantasies of sovereignty. Sometimes it's explained that the child sees the mother cooking in the kitchen, and the child wants to cook just like the mother. The mother knows it's dangerous for the child to play with fire, and there are hot skillets and boiling water. There are all kinds of danger areas for the child. But the mother wants to satisfy, to please their child. So they set up a fake kitchen, a little plastic stove, plastic utensils, fake fire, maybe just a little light bulb or something, so that the child can act out their fantasies of cooking like the mother. At the same time, they don't really get to deal with the same elements as the mother deals with. They're given a sort of an artificial, fake environment with which to act out their fantasies. So Krishna provides, out of his causeless mercy, he provides this world of cause and effect and accommodates us. And not only that, not only does he put up with our bad attitude, our smart aleckness, with patience and love and forgiveness, not only does he create for us our own residency where we can go and be totally indifferent to him, but he accompanies us as the super soul within the heart. Upadrasht anamartacha bhokta bhakta maheshwaram paramatmi chapiyukto dehishmin purusham padaham. There's never a time in our most abominable, sinful, criminally minded activities where the Lord is not sitting there witnessing us, patiently overseeing, and even permitting the fulfillment of our godless desires. He's there since time immemorial throughout many, many incarnations as human, superhuman, as demigods, as subhuman, as even in the animal bodies. The Lord has never abandoned us. He's never deserted us. In fact, there's never a time when the Lord is not standing by, willing to save us, willing to rescue us from our own shortcomings, from our own foolishness. Therefore it said, Aham evasham ebrage nanyat sadasan, that before creation there was the Lord, full with his 6 opulences: wealth, strength, beauty, fame, knowledge, and renunciation. There is always existing Vaikuntha, the transcendental, spiritual, eternal abodes inhabited by the 4-handed Narayan expansions of the Lord, where the Lord is worshipped in majesty and reverence and awe by all of the inhabitants of the palatial, imperial realms of Vaikuntha. And then at the top of all the Vaikuntha planets, in his personal Shradam, which is called Goloka Vrindavan. That Goloka Vrindavan planet is bigger than all of the Vaikuntha planets put together. The material world in comparison is just a speck compared to the Vaikuntha planets. What to speak of the residents of Goloka Vrindavan? And Krishna, Goloka Eva Nivasati Akalatma Bhuto, being so much committed to loving, intimate, reciprocal relationships with his Nitya Siddhas, his forever surrendered devotees, the Lord is imprisoned. He's shackled by the love of his devotees, and he never sets foot outside of Vrindavan. Goloka eva nivasati akalatma bhuto. And yet at the same time, through the diffusion of his energies, he is everywhere present. Just like the sun god, he has his business on the sun planet. It's a heavenly planet. It's a celestial abode. The living beings there are so pious, so righteous that they literally glow with their inner vitality and inner effulgence. And Vivishwan is the greatest, the most magnificent of all of them. And his duty as the leader is to make sure that his citizens are happy and satisfied and well cared for. So in one sense, he has nothing personally to do with what goes on in this earth planet. And yet, almost as an aside, almost as a comma or an apostrophe, from his abode, the sun planet, sunshine, goes out in all directions, up and down and higher and low and north, south, east, south, southeast. In every direction from the sun planet, the sun emanates. It supports, it's the reason that all the planets in the universe float. It creates water, and it creates fruits and vegetables and maintenance. So all of our prosperity, our life itself, rests upon the sun god, who himself really personally has nothing to do with this earth planet. In the same way, Krishna pervades and supports everything. At the same time, he is committed to the loving service of his devotees. Regarding his topmost devotees, the gopis, who are heart and soul surrendered to Krishna, who know nothing but Krishna, who think about nothing but Krishna, who talk about nobody but Krishna, who do not a single thing, who lift not a single finger unless it is to honor and to serve Krishna. In the face of that radical surrender of the gopis, the milkmaids, celebrated Prabhupada says, milkmaids of Vrindavan, Krishna declares himself bankrupt. Na paraya ham niravajya samyuta. He says to the gopis, because of your unselfish, unmotivated, uninterrupted service to me, I can never repay you with all my wealth, all my knowledge, all my power, all my fame. I will never come to the end of my indebtedness to you. So as we agree to surrender and to be divine slaves of Krishna, Krishna being the high-minded, loving Father and Creator of us that he is, he then enslaves himself to the love of his devotees. And being thus shackled and chained and enslaved and controlled by the love of his devotees, Krishna personally never sets foot out of Vrindavan. And yet at the same time, indirectly through his energy, the Brahma Jyoti, everything about this material world is generated, varieties, diversity springs up, and a residence is provided fully and opulently and abundantly and lavishly for those who care not a fig for him. And after the creation is finished, it's annihilated and retracted back into him. Then again, everything goes back to its simple, pristine, streamlined state of being Paramvyam, the transcendental, incomparable, self-effulgent abode of the Lord. One other postscript to all of this is that a fourth feature of the Lord's mercy and love for us is that not only does he put up with our bad attitude, not only does he provide us with an alternative material world, and not only does he accompany us in the heart as a super soul and maintain and pervade and support everything through the Paramatma as well, but a fourth manifestation of his unbelievable mercy and love for us, which never ends, is that in the material universe, as the Lord descends from Goloka Vrindavan and replicates his transcendental pastimes within the material world. This manifestation of the Lord's internal potency is called Gokula Vrindavan. In the spiritual world, it's called Goloka Vrindavan. But this traveling roadshow, which goes from universe to universe within the material world, is called Gokula Vrindavan. And that is a manifestation of the Lord's duplicated, replicated form, his pastimes, his intimate loving relationships. His associates also travel with him in the roadshow. And although it travels from here to there within the material worlds, within the period of time when the material world is manifested, it is it's a bubble, so to speak, in the material ocean, which is comprised only of the internal energies of the Lord. And the purpose of this roadshow is to somehow or other give a glimpse of the superior divine activities of the spiritual world by which the suffering living entities in this material world can get back their zest, get back their interest, reawaken their love of God, and go back to home, ultimately back to Godhead, by serving the Lord under the auspices of a bona fide spiritual master. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhu Karunai Sravana Sudachite Karya Udai. Just as the Lord's effulgent mode exists intact before the creation of this material world, and it will continue to exist after the dissolution of this material world, we, if you trace our origins back far enough, we have also nothing to do with matter. In our original purified consciousness, we're also a contributing part of that spiritual world. Constitutionally, Krishna created us as eternal, indestructible, invincible, unstoppable, talented, creative, loving parts and parcels of his. He wired us so that our purpose, our happiness, our fulfillment is in serving him. And we were there in the spiritual world with the Lord, but somehow or other we weren't mature. Somehow or other we weren't developed. And we fell down into this material world, and we became thusly engaged. But Krishna's hope for us is that we will reestablish ourselves. We had a period in the spiritual world prior to coming here, and that after leaving here, we will go back to that original, pristine, self-effulgent world, which is not ruled by cause and effect, in which there is no influence of past, present, and future. The only driving force is love. That we will go back there more mature, more knowledgeable, once burned, twice shy. That we'll return to the loving lotus feet in the service of the Lord once again, never to leave him a second time. That's what the Lord wants. And even though he cannot leave his surrendered, eternally liberated associates even for a second, even though he cannot divert his attention from them even for a second, because as they are committed to him, Krishna is fully committed to them. While that is all going on, nevertheless, through the diffusion of his various energies, through his many Leela and Purusha avatars, through Karna Daksha Vishnu, Garbha Daksha Vishnu, Chitra Daksha Vishnu, and through the roadshow itself, he never stops exerting himself through the diffusion of his energies and through his avatars to wake us up, to bring us back home, back to Godhead, to the shelter of his eternally loving lotus feet. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Food for thought today. Bill, a seed sprouts when the living entity becomes associated with it. The totality of material nature expands when karna. Now, it says see more, but it doesn't allow me to see the rest of your comment. But I'll look at it after we conclude this broadcast. Jai Bakaria says, true, thank you for the amazing talks. Blessings from the UK. From Singapore, Padma Lochan Krishna Das. Pranams to Singapore, the land of the lion, the Shringadev. Got a nice link with the database here for Prashant. Prashant is always right there, and sometimes Anjali also with links and quotes. So that if you go through the comment section, you can immediately access the various references that we used during the talk. Padma Lochan Krishna Das again. Anjali, even Mother Yashoda put down Krishna to save the milk. Well, you'll all be able to read these comments also, as I will. And if there are any questions in there, I'll be glad to answer them. Please try to question on the subject matter, not something totally unrelated. That's our focus. And we're trying to tattoo the soul. We're trying to make some points and embed them in the soul so that as we go throughout our day, we'll have a very, very deep impression of something meaningful and spiritual, which will drive us in all of our interactions with our family, with our friends, and with our co-workers. We're meant to be a light. We're meant to be an example. As Krishna is illuminating us through our spiritual master, let us make that light available for others also, for the uplifted of mankind and for the glory of God. So this has been Motivational Monday. I feel, I hope you agree with me, with all the emojis, that we've gotten off to a good start, and we'll continue the momentum tomorrow for Transcendental Tuesday. In the meantime, join, share, comment, question, make the emojis, and don't forget, first and foremost, till we meet again, don't forget to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.